I had no idea what I was getting myself into when my sister left me alone with her husband, but I had no choice. She said she was just going out for groceries, and that I was the only person around who could help with the wardrobe she had insisted they buy. I had barely set foot in their house before the whole situation was off to a weird start. He looked at me as if I had just arrived at a funeral. A quick, awkward glance followed by a slow nod, like he'd been expecting this moment for years. We've never really had a chance to talk much. I mean, my sister married him a few years ago, and I'd been the quiet third wheel at family gatherings, never quite fitting in but never being out of place either. Still, this was different. The two of them were always so, together. They had their own world, their own routine, and here I was, suddenly inserted into it like a misplaced puzzle piece. "Hey, how do you feel about helping me put this thing together?" His voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure how to ask. The wardrobe, which had been shoved into the corner of the living room, looked like something from IKEA, so you already know it was going to be a nightmare. "I thought you were the handyman around here," I said, attempting to sound casual, but the look on his face told me I'd hit a nerve. His nervous smile gave away how much he hated anything to do with putting things together. I'm more of a sit on the couch and look at directions guy. You know, the one who says, it can't be that hard, right?" He chuckled, but I could see the real panic behind it. He wasn't even holding the instructions. They were just scattered on the coffee table like some kind of abstract art. "Let's see what we've got then," I said, already knowing this would end in disaster. The first mistake we made was trying to put the first piece together without looking at the instructions. I mean, really, what could go wrong? It was just some wooden panels, screws, and bolts. How hard could it be? I stared at the pieces for a few seconds. "Are these the sides or the back?" He was already sweating. I think those are the sides." He pointed at the stack of panels as if that was a definitive answer. "Yeah, the sides. Definitely." We both picked up the pieces, fumbling, trying to figure out which way was up. At some point, we both leaned into the work and bumped into each other, a bit too close for comfort. We froze for a second. Neither of us spoke, but there was this weird energy in the room now, something electric, something that didn't belong. "Okay, all right," I said, trying to break the tension. "Let's just follow the instructions, yeah?" He glanced at me like he'd been jolted awake from some kind of daze. "Yeah, right. Instructions. Good idea." It wasn't long before the sexual tension started building. Well, maybe not in the way you'd think. Sure, there were a few too many "oops, sorry" moments when we accidentally brushed against each other, but it was the double entendres that made things take a strange turn. "You know," he said, his voice suddenly sounding deeper than usual, "this would probably go a lot smoother if we had the right tools." He said it so casually, it took me a second to catch what he was implying. I leaned in, and without thinking, shot back. "Tools? The only thing missing here is a manual for handling delicate situations like this." He paused, then grinned like he'd just been handed a victory. "Well, you're clearly the expert on that." It was a harmless joke, but there was something in the way he said it, almost too serious, too playful, for us to just brush it off. I felt a heat rising in me, but I quickly chalked it up to the awkwardness of the moment. Besides, we were still technically related, and no matter how much we joked around, the weirdness of the situation was still palpable. I tried to refocus on the task, picking up a screw that had fallen to the floor. "Right, let's just get this thing done before my sister comes back and finds out how much of a mess we've made." "Oh, she'll never know," he replied with a chuckle, reaching for another piece. "We'll just blame it on user error. You know, like the time she tried to assemble the bookshelf and got everything backwards." "Wait," I said, laughing. "That was her? I thought that was a prank. I didn't even know she had it in her." He grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, well, sometimes it takes a little instruction." He winked, and I immediately regretted it. The way he said instruction was laced with far more than just the innocent meaning of directions. But the tension didn't end there. As we tried to fix a part that clearly didn't fit, Our hands brushed against each other's, just for a moment. I swear I felt something electric pulse between us. It wasn't just an accidental touch, it lingered for a second too long. The air around us became thick. I turned away, pretending to inspect the screws, but the whole thing felt off. We weren't talking about the wardrobe anymore. Every glance we exchanged seemed charged. I could feel the weight of his stare whenever I bent down, trying to grab something, or when I reached for the instructions, our arms almost touching. "So, if you were doing this with anyone other than your sister's husband," he said, his voice quieter now, "would you be as helpful?" The line was so casual, but the way he said it made me stop mid-motion. Was he really going there? I laughed, trying to mask the discomfort with humor. "I don't know. I might be more inclined to offer more hands-on assistance. You know, the kind that doesn't involve paper instructions." He raised an eyebrow, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something playful, and maybe a little dangerous. "I like the sound of that." I laughed again, this time nervously, but the chemistry was there, lingering between us like an unspoken promise. Neither of us said anything else, but as we continued assembling the wardrobe, the air between us remained thick. The screwdrivers, the Allen wrenches, the confusing diagrams, nothing seemed as important as the strange, growing bond we were forming. Neither of us dared to break the silence, but the unspoken words seemed louder than ever. We were playing with fire. It didn't take long for things to go from bad to worse. The wardrobe, which we had assumed would be a quick project, was quickly becoming a giant nightmare. We were no longer following the instructions, because let's face it, those little diagrams might as well have been hieroglyphs. No matter how many times we flipped the pages, nothing was making sense. "You sure this piece goes here?" I asked, squinting at the instruction manual, which looked more like a cryptic riddle than anything useful. He was already holding a power drill, looking at it like he'd never seen one before. "Honestly? I'm not sure this whole thing goes anywhere." He stared at the wooden panels like they were going to jump up and bite him. "But hey, let's see what happens. Worst case scenario, we have a cool pile of wooden things." I couldn't help but laugh, even though my frustration was starting to bubble over. "Yeah, and my sister's going to love the cool pile of wooden things when she gets home. Don't worry, we'll blame it on the instructions. IKEA's the problem, not us." He shot me a grin that made me roll my eyes, but I couldn't help it, he had a point. It wasn't like we could blame ourselves entirely for this disaster. I stood up and grabbed a handful of screws, trying to get my mind off the fact that we were both standing so close to each other in a tiny living room. At this point, we had lost all sense of personal space. He bumped into me as he turned around to grab a different tool, and I felt the heat of his body against mine. It was an innocent enough move, but it sent an unexpected jolt through me. "Sorry," he muttered, looking at me with a smile that made my heart do a weird little flip. "You all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I said quickly, brushing it off. But I could feel my pulse quicken, and I cursed myself for feeling this way. This was just a damn wardrobe, for God's sake. Why was I so aware of every little thing he did? He was the one to break the silence, and for a second, I was relieved. "So, do you have experience with this stuff? Assembling furniture, I mean?" I shook my head, trying to focus on screwing a bolt into place. "Not really. I'm more of a figure-it-out-as-I-go kind of person." "Yeah, me too," he said with a laugh. "Which is probably why this is such a mess." We both glanced at the pieces scattered around us. It didn't look like a wardrobe anymore. It looked like a jigsaw puzzle, only we were missing half the pieces. "You know, I'm pretty sure these are supposed to be the legs," I said, pointing to a set of oddly shaped pieces. He squinted at them and shrugged. "You're probably right. But it's hard to tell. I mean, look at the way these parts don't fit together. This isn't a wardrobe, it's a trap." That made me laugh, and for a moment, everything felt lighter. There was something oddly comforting about his sense of humor in this insane situation. Even when things were going completely off the rails, he still managed to keep things lighthearted. I didn't know why, but that started to make me feel more comfortable around him. But then things shifted again. We were both leaning over the same piece, trying to figure out how to get it to fit, and once again, we brushed up against each other. This time, the contact lasted a little too long, just enough for the tension to spike. We both froze, but neither of us pulled away. For a second, I couldn't breathe, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Sorry again," he mumbled, pulling back quickly. But there was a glint in his eyes, one that made my stomach flutter, even as I tried to brush it off as nothing. "Don't worry about it," I said far too quickly. "We're just close quarters, right?" He gave me a weird look, as if he wasn't sure if I was joking or being serious. Yeah, definitely. Just a bit too close." We both fell into an awkward silence, and I could feel the weight of the moment in the air. It wasn't like it was anything serious, but there was something there, a pull, a charge. It was starting to get hard to ignore, and I hated how much I was starting to notice how his every move seemed to be in sync with mine. Every time I reached for a tool, he did the same. Every time I leaned over, he did too. There was something synchronized about it, almost like we were falling into some kind of rhythm. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "do you and my sister always build things together like this?" He chuckled, but it was a little more forced than usual. "We've tried. Mostly, I end up just watching her do all the work. I'm not the best at it." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Seriously? You're the one who spends the most time on the couch?" "Well, yeah," he said with a shrug. "She's kind of the doer, you know? I'm more of the guy who brings the snacks and offers moral support." I snorted. "Ah, the classic snack and moral support guy. I get it." He laughed, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made the conversation take a different turn. "Hey, at least I'm good for something." "Oh, I'm sure you're good for more than that," I said before I could stop myself. My mouth was working faster than my brain. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, but I couldn't take it back now. He didn't react at first, but then he raised an eyebrow, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Is that so?" I opened my mouth to backtrack, but I couldn't. Instead, I found myself nodding. "Yeah, I guess so." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was filled with this heavy kind of tension, one that neither of us knew how to handle. Neither of us said anything for a while, and for a moment, it was like we were stuck in some kind of unspoken moment, too afraid to make the next move but not willing to back away from it. "Anyway," I said, trying to regain control of the situation, "let's get this thing finished before my sister comes home." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Let's do that." But something had shifted. We weren't just assembling a wardrobe anymore. We were caught in something else, something unspoken, something that neither of us could quite place, but we both knew it was there. As we continued working, I couldn't help but notice how much closer we were getting. And no matter how many times I told myself to focus on the task, all I could think about was the tension hanging in the air between us. By the time we reached the halfway point, it was clear we were nowhere near finished. The wardrobe, or what I could only assume was going to resemble one at some point, was still just a chaotic pile of mismatched parts. Our earlier attempts had only made things worse, screws that didn't fit, parts that didn't align, and both of us completely lost in the process. "All right, I've had it with these directions," I said, throwing the instruction manual onto the floor. "This thing is impossible." He sat back, rubbing his forehead, clearly as frustrated as I was. "I think it's the instructions, not us. They're just written in a different language, man. This whole thing is a puzzle, a terrible, terrible puzzle." I couldn't help but laugh. "I swear, I think IKEA secretly enjoys watching us suffer. It's like a sick game to them." He chuckled too, but I could see the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. We were both sweating, staring at the mess we'd created, and for a second, I thought about bailing and just letting my sister deal with it when she got home. But for some reason, I didn't want to leave yet. "Do you ever feel like, sometimes, we're just not cut out for this kind of thing?" he asked, breaking the silence. I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Like assembling furniture?" "Yeah," he said, looking me dead in the eye. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough for, well, anything. You know? Like, no matter what I do, I can't get it right. I wasn't expecting him to say that. His words hung in the air between us, and I could feel the weight of them. It wasn't something I expected from him. He seemed like the type who had everything together, always smiling, always cracking jokes. But hearing him admit his own insecurities made something shift in me. Well, you're doing better than I am, I said, trying to lighten the mood. I'm about 2 seconds away from just leaving this whole thing on fire and calling it a day. He gave me a small smile, but there was something different in it this time, something more sincere. I don't know, man. It just feels like I'm always the one who messes up. Like I can't do anything right. I screw up at work, I screw up at home. Even this wardrobe, look at it. We can't even get that right. I swallowed, suddenly feeling like this conversation had taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. It felt like we were stepping into dangerous territory, getting too real. And yet, part of me couldn't back out now. I get it, I said quietly, more serious than I'd intended. You know, sometimes I feel the same way. Like, no matter what I do, I'm just in the background, not really making a difference. It's hard to keep up the act, pretending everything's fine. He looked at me, his eyes softening. Yeah, exactly. It's like we're both stuck, and no one even notices. I nodded, feeling an unexpected connection building between us. It wasn't just about the wardrobe anymore. It was about us, two people who had never really connected before but were suddenly seeing each other for who we were, flaws and all. There was a long pause, and for a second, I almost forgot about the mess we'd made. It was just the two of us, standing there, finally talking about something real. It was strange how a simple project could unravel so many unspoken things. So, I said, trying to bring the conversation back to something lighter. You ever thought about maybe, I don't know, trying to fix things up with some less confusing directions? I'm sure there's a YouTube tutorial somewhere. He let out a breath and looked at me, his smile returning. You know what? Yeah. Let's do it. Screw the directions. We'll just watch a video, and if we screw it up again, at least we can laugh about it. I laughed too, the tension in the room finally starting to dissipate. You know, that sounds way better than trying to read those stupid pictures on the page. We both grabbed our phones and quickly found a tutorial, watching as some overly enthusiastic DIY expert showed us how to put together a wardrobe with far more enthusiasm than was necessary. But at least it was clear. Step by step, we could follow it, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't lost. Alright, so this goes here, he said, pointing at his phone, then holding up a piece of the wardrobe. And this one goes here? I glanced at it, trying to follow along. Yeah, that looks right. It's like a puzzle with a cheat code. He grinned at that. We're officially hacking the system. We worked for the next few hours, occasionally muttering curses under our breath when things didn't fit, but for some reason, the whole situation felt lighter. There was no longer this tension between us. We were working together now, as a team, laughing at how absurd the whole thing was. It wasn't just about the wardrobe anymore, it was about the weird, unexpected bond that had formed between us. We were still figuring things out, but for once, it felt like we were both in it together. As the wardrobe slowly took shape, piece by piece, I realized that maybe this was how things were meant to happen. I wasn't just there to help assemble some furniture. I was there to connect, to see the person behind the jokes, behind the facade. And maybe, just maybe, he was seeing me the same way. You know, I said, breaking the silence, this whole thing is kind of like life. You try to follow the rules, and everything just falls apart. But then, when you stop caring so much about getting it perfect and just figure it out as you go, it all comes together. He looked up at me, his expression a little more thoughtful than usual. Yeah. Maybe you're right. We both sat back, surveying our work. The wardrobe was finished. It wasn't perfect, but it was done. And in a strange way, it felt like we had built something more than just furniture. We had built an unlikely connection, something that neither of us had expected when my sister left us alone in the first place. "You think my sister will notice?" I asked, a little sheepish. He shrugged. "Who knows? But I think we did pretty damn good, considering." I smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Yeah. We did all right." And for once, I didn't feel like the outsider. In that moment, it wasn't about family or awkwardness or anything else. It was just two guys finally figuring things out. By the time we finished assembling the wardrobe, I had to admit, it wasn't half bad. It wasn't perfect, no, but it looked functional, and that was all that really mattered. We stood there, both of us admiring our work with a kind of quiet pride. After all the chaos, the cursing, and the near breakdowns, we had actually made something. I wasn't sure who was more surprised, him or me. "Well, that's it," I said, wiping my hands on my pants, even though they were still covered in sawdust and grease. "I think we're done." He nodded, giving a slow, satisfied smile. "We did it. I mean, it's not what the instructions said, but hey, it's a wardrobe. Yeah, let's hope it doesn't collapse when she tries to put clothes in it." I joked, but the truth was, I was just relieved to be done with it. He looked at me for a second before giving a small laugh. "Honestly, I think we're good. Could have been worse. At least it's standing, right?" "Barely," I muttered, eyeing the thing suspiciously. "But hey, if it falls over, we can blame it on IKEA. It's not like they give us decent instructions." "Exactly," he agreed. "And if my sister gets mad, we'll just tell her that we tried our best and that we deserve a beer." I smirked at the idea. "You're not wrong. She'll probably just throw us out, but hey, we gave it a shot." The conversation had started to flow more easily now, and the tension that had once hung in the air between us seemed to have evaporated. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by something else. Maybe it was just relief, but I could tell that whatever weird connection we had made earlier was still lingering, even if either of us knew how to address it. "So," he said, as if trying to shift gears, "what do we do now?" I glanced over at him, the words feeling strange coming out of my mouth. "I guess we just wait for my sister to get back?" He raised an eyebrow. "You sure you don't want to hang out a bit? I mean, we've been stuck in here for hours now. Might as well make the most of it." My stomach did a weird flip at his suggestion. I had no idea why that little comment sent a shock through me, but it did. Yeah, sure. Why not?" I wasn't sure what it was. Maybe it was the way he said it, or maybe it was the strange intimacy that had developed between us during the chaos of assembling that damn wardrobe. Either way, I suddenly found myself wishing that the day didn't have to end. We sat there for a while, talking about everything and nothing. The conversation shifted from the wardrobe to random topics: sports, movies, work. It was casual, easy, and despite everything, I found myself enjoying his company in a way I hadn't expected. There was a certain comfort in being able to talk freely, especially with someone who seemed as out of place in this situation as I was. It felt natural in an odd way. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You know, for what it's worth," he said, leaning back on the couch, "this whole thing turned out better than I thought it would." I looked at him, trying to hide the confusion in my expression. "Better than you thought it would?" "Yeah," he said, his voice a little quieter now. "I mean, I didn't know what to expect when I found out I'd be stuck here with you. But it wasn't as bad as I thought." I blinked, unsure of where this was going. Was he complimenting me? Or was he just making a joke? Before I could respond, he continued, his tone a little more serious now. "Honestly, I didn't know what it would be like, us just alone. But I'm glad we did this. I think I needed this time, I guess." I stared at him for a second, feeling my heart beat a little faster. I wasn't sure what to say, how to respond to that, but there was something in his words that made me feel more exposed. I hadn't expected this conversation to take such a personal turn. "I'm glad we did it too," I said finally, keeping my voice steady even though my thoughts were racing. "I wasn't sure what to expect either." He smiled, but this time it wasn't just a casual grin. It was more genuine, a little softer than before. It was like he was seeing me for the first time, and for some reason, I didn't mind. Well, maybe next time, he said, his smile turning a little cheeky. We can tackle something a little easier. Maybe we'll try putting together a coffee table, or… Before he could finish, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the moment. We both turned our heads toward the window, hearing the familiar engine of my sister's car. Well, that's our cue, I said, standing up a little too quickly, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had settled in my chest. He stood up as well, clearly noticing the shift in my demeanor. Yeah. I guess we better hope she doesn't notice the minor imperfections. Minor, I repeated, eyeing the wardrobe again with a smirk. Sure, let's go with that. We both shared a brief, awkward laugh as we heard the front door open. My sister's voice rang through the house, and I couldn't help but feel the anticipation building. Hey guys! What did you do with the wardrobe? We exchanged a quick look. There was no turning back now. Well, I said, feeling a grin tug at my lips. We did our best. He looked at me, his grin matching mine. And then some. With that, we both walked toward the front door to face the music. Despite the tension and weirdness of the past few hours, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. The wardrobe was done, and no matter how imperfect it was, I couldn't deny that we'd somehow pulled it off, together.